Hi, welcome back to Academic Markets Insight. I am particularly excited about this because we are going to be talking about the wire card fraud, and I'm stumbling over it because I have never heard of this. And I cannot wait to dive into this. This is something that happened in 2020. I mean, I was definitely alive. I was definitely kicking. I may have been, dealing with small children, but nonetheless, I had never heard of it. So when you brought this up, and I thought, oh my goodness, I know our number one fan can't wait to hear about it. So without further ado, Dr. Rowe, please walk us through what happened with the Wirecard fraud.
Yeah, and this is a really I just when we start to go through how visible this was over in Europe, it's amazing that it has not I mean, you and I pay attention to stuff. I mean, I know a lot was going on in 2020, but you'd think we would have at least have heard of this company in passing. So Wirecard, they're a German payment processor. They were founded in 99. They may be a dot-com bubble type company if you think about it, because they're very similar to PayPal. They provided digital payments, card issuance, and our automatic reaction to a non-bank company offering banking services is skepticism.
Very
They
much so.
they were kind of goofing along and had good quarters, had bad quarters, etc. And the stock really did start to take off. And the folks that make the decisions around what goes into the DAX, and the DAX in Germany is a lot like the Dow Jones Industrial Average. It's either 20 or 30 stocks. I can't remember exactly, but it's not like the S&P 500 is the point. And when they put Wirecard into the DAX, they took out Commerce Bank, which was an original DAX member, and they were suffering in 2020, both Deutsche Bank and Commerce Bank. And there's actually a Deutsche Bank fraud that not a lot of people that have heard of that I think is going to be part of a series here. But they were trying to put Commerce Bank and Deutsche Bank together as a single bank so they'd have a national champion there. That never worked out. And both companies have survived and done pretty well on their own at this point. And this company, Wirecard, got I keep wanting to call it wire fraud. Wirecard, the market cap exceeded 20 billion at one point. They got to be a pretty large company. Now they reported pretty strong growth and high profits for years. I'm saying they reported. I'm not saying they experienced. I'm saying they reported. That's where the fraud comes in.
I'm hearing the subtle.
And I pulled up there, and I don't normally do this, but I think I'm going to do it anyway. I pulled up on Bloomberg their earnings history, and it's really funny. I say here that their last 6 earnings reports were upside surprises, but check this on I'm going to go ahead and show the Bloomberg function. This is what I get for going off script. So this is an earnings page from Bloomberg, and the last 6 times they reported, they had really nice upside surprises. Before that, you go down a little bit.
Oh my goodness.
I know. How did they suddenly go from a bunch of this crap to some really nice consistency? That right there might have been somewhat of a red flag. That
and you can see, just for, again, our number one fan, if you're looking over the left column,
oops, sorry,
2019, 2018. So again, we're right in that time frame of right before 2020. So this isn't happening right now. This is what had happened. And there was one green surprise in there that was, I think, a 25.
It was a huge surprise back in 2016.
Yeah, huge.
Yeah. So I don't even know if that one's trustable. So maybe they got away with it once, and like I've said on this program before, you can always get away with something once. But then you start repeating, and we'll see that as we talk about frauds. So they were reporting high growth and high profits for years. The last 6 earnings reports we just looked at on the Bloomberg were upside surprises. There were large portions of reported revenue coming from an opaque third-party partner that was located outside of Europe.
Excellent.
And what ended up happening was they reached a point with an audit where the auditor couldn't find almost $2 billion in cash that they had on hand. And once they had to admit that, everything totally fell apart. And they were forging documents and faking contracts and everything across the board. And you and I have already talked offline about who we think, where we think this showed up. I think that what this past season's industry, I think this past season's industry, where they had that whole payment processor thing going on, right, and they kept saying it was a fraud, but it kept going up. That's what happened here as well. It's almost like the same story. So, I know on Billions, which is in the US, they'll talk about different little frauds and they'll give them slightly different names, but we know what they're talking about. Apparently, people in the know over in Europe probably knew that that was about Wirecard. So just a little time frame stuff. In 2015 to 2019, short sellers and different people were throwing allegations of accounting manipulation out there. And then in 2019, starting in January of 2019, and then over the course of 5 or 6 articles, the Financial Times published some major investigative work on Wirecard. They'd gone to addresses where they said they had offices, etc. And that was some of the stuff that we saw in Industry again. Mm-hmm. So now, if you haven't watched the most recent season of Industry, you'll have something to relate it to. Things really came to a head in June of 2020. On June 18th, Ernst & Young refused to sign off on the accounts, refused to sign off on the audit, was probably would have been a better way for me to put that. 4 days later, it was confirmed that 1.9 billion, at one time it was reported over 2 billion, but who's splitting hairs there, was missing. And then let me finish the timeline. And then they filed for bankruptcy a week later. So there. Yes.
What is the significance of Ernst & Young not signing off on the documents?
If Ernst & Young finds fraud and they sign off, they are legally liable. And in a funny kind of twist of things, I've heard Wirecard referred to as the Enron of Europe.
Oh, yeah.
And Anderson basically got put out of business for signing off on Enron's shenanigans. So and that may, if that hadn't happened before, I don't know. I don't, Ernst & Young might have been more willing to go along.
Sure.
But the auditor, there are legal repercussions. You're culpable if you find fraud and you sign off on it. And I don't care how big of a company you are, you don't want to sign off on that. So I pulled up a price chart. This is a monthly price chart from 2014 through 2020. And I'm going to highlight some stuff. That's when, in this whole time frame here, this is when reports of fraud were coming out. That's starting in 2015 all the way through 2019. And we have discussions in the classroom with students about you can't short on valuation.
Right.
And there has to be a catalyst to really hit a home run with a short. There's got to be some sort of fraud or something going on. And that's what the case was here. But if you picked up on it in 2017, do you think you really would have profited from it?
No. And I'd like to jump in again for our number one fraud. If you're or not fraud, our number one fan, if you're shorting, you want to try to reap those profits quickly because you're going to get margin calls and it's going to become a very expensive trade. So you can be right, but the holding costs and the carrying costs and all of that costs associated with being in the trade could possibly eat away all your profits.
Oh, yeah.
So one of the big things in the Big Short, Michael Burry, he was right, but he was just too early getting into the trade, and that does erode some of your profitability.
And there were several entities that called the housing thing, but were too early and got blown out of them. And I was associated with a real estate hedge fund. Going into 2007, we were majorly short. We were down 30%, and they pulled the plug on us.
Sure.
We were just early.
Too early.
And I look at this chart and I think maybe under the word "of" would have been about when we would have been shorting this over the same time, over the same time period. And if we kind of figured it out, and there were people that figured it out, and there was there were short sellers that were all over this story for some time. And I do think one of the things that happens when short sellers are pushing on a company is that they start to double down on their own fraud. And you don't lose 1.9 billion euros, over a weekend, hopefully.
No, and I like how you say that. It's when you start to lose, you double down.
Yeah. So that's when they got put in the DAX. I just like to point this out. They were not taken out of the DAX for 2 months until August. And they were replaced by, I've forgotten the name of the firm. They were replaced by another techie company. It was like a food delivery company or something, like their version of DoorDash or something. But put Commerce Bank back in. Put the old school bank in. So, and then this is where the FT articles were coming out. Okay. And I am going to speak to some journalism students next week, and this is one of the things I wanted to point out was just because the market doesn't react to you putting facts out there, it doesn't mean you're wrong. It just often means that you're early, and that's the timing part is much more difficult than the being right part with respect to shorts. You can be early buying a stock, and you can wait it out. It's a lot easier to wait out than a short. You can lose more than 100% on a short. People that shorted in 2017 on this one, they'd be down 300% the day that the stock got put into the DAX. So big fraud. Everybody bought into it, made its way into the DAX. There were lots of whistleblowers that left the company talking about accounting irregularities. The Financial Times really put this out there for the financial world to start analyzing. And you can see that really in 2019, and they started in January 2019. There were a few other articles that I think the last one was in October. But over the course of the year, they were really informing people about what was going on. And you can see that the stock didn't make a new high, but it also didn't fall apart.
Right.
They had a lot of overseas subsidiaries. In the industry example, I think they had an office in Africa or something, and it was one guy that was putting numbers into a spreadsheet. That was his job. And fraudulent companies will do this. They will go after their critics. They will, yes. If you're a short seller or you say so, if you're, and I think probably a good example for Americans is Bill Ackman. He may rightfully be calling out that a company is not on the up and up. And people go right at him. Oh, you're just trying to profit. You're a greedy guy. All of that kind of stuff. Yeah, he is trying to profit, but they're also pointing out things that are pretty factual.
Well, and again, we're talking about profitability, but there are people who are truly invested in Wirecard, and their retirement is based on this, and their retirement is going to be wiped out. You have also people who are utilizing their service and are being treated with fraud. It's yes, you want to make money off of it, but at the same time, the greater society benefits from not having fraudulent companies.
Oh, yeah, you mentioned people losing their retirement, et cetera. Well, that's a 60% drop in one day. Stock went from 100 to 40, basically. Wow. That's a 60%. That was easy to calculate. It gets more difficult to calculate. Stock's still and this is a daily chart, by the way. That's wow. June 18th, June 19th, the CEO quit. That's bad for the stock, I guess. June 22nd, we can't find the 1.9 billion. Ooh. They originally reported it, I think, as 2.1. But hey, what's 200 million? And then the CEO got arrested.
And I like that was a bit of an up.
Their chief operating officer fled to Asia, and I don't know if they ever caught him or not.
Wow.
Part of it is just the ridiculousness here. Again, how did we ever hear of this thing? So,
Well, and it's funny when we were watching industry, you're kind of looking at it thinking, this can't be real because it seems so over the top and
it
it seems like, no,
anybody
that's
that
not
does
real.
that is going to get caught, I think, is the way that it's how I was thinking about it.
Right.
So the company, there was weak corporate guidance. You know, typically, if you've got somebody running a company that's almost doing it in a dictatorial fashion, it opens up the possibility of fraud. I'm not the biggest fan in the world of environmental, social, and governance investing, but
Right.
I do think there is something to the governance part of that, where you've got checks and balances, where you have management that has come across as being truthful on a
Hmm.
pretty consistent basis. So the governance part, probably in this day and age, it may have shown up just a little bit earlier with the bigger focus on ESG. Um, there were regulatory blind spots in Germany's financial supervision. We've brought this up multiple times, but entities that are not banks that try to get into banking businesses, it really is just an area that you often find things blowing up. I mean, Enron was a power company, but they got into trading power, and that's
Yes, they
really
did.
and that is a pseudo banking type thing. But also the regulators are trying to keep up with all of this kind of stuff, and it's somewhat difficult. They've got no jurisdiction if somebody's
Right.
working outside of the banking laws, and there apparently people continuously figure out ways to do that. You know, there was a culture focused on the hyper growth. Whenever we see any TV shows or anything about companies that are not necessarily on the up and up and taken off to the upside, there's always really fun parties. So I
Yes.
can only imagine what kind of
Yes,
fun
what the
parties they
parties.
had at the Wirecard headquarters.
Oh, I
Uh,
bet.
so, again, high growth. And then there had to have been a fear of missing out on the stock.
Definitely.
That chart just looks like it. You should be able to, and I've talked a lot toward the end of the semester this year about trying to pick up on companies doing things that, or trying to fool people into not realizing that their growth is slowing, et cetera. And I'll talk about anything that they do that they do as fraudulent. It might show up in the footnotes. You always want to dig into the footnotes. You probably could have figured out something with respect to these guys with their cash balances, et cetera. And if you were an institutional investor, you probably could have done some sort of check on, what was going on outside of what they were telling you in Germany.
Hmm.
It's a complex structure, as I said, but this is really, that last bullet point is really what I wanted to get across. Is that just because short sellers tell you that there might be some problems with a company, and yes, they will benefit from that, doesn't necessarily mean it's not true. And in fact, if it's not true, and they bring other people in to short along with them, it's going to turn out badly for them, because every short has to cover at some point. And if you
Right.
get a lot of people to join you being short a company that really isn't fraudulent, and they prove they're not fraudulent, it's going to overshoot to the upside.
Right.
It's going to be worse. So, short
And it,
sellers and journalists, they can be really early, but they can also let you know where there are specific risks within a specific company, et cetera. So with that, kind of a fun one that neither of us had ever heard of. I found a couple of more that I'm thinking maybe we'll do a short series on these. But with that, you can take us home, and we've got to find a new number one fan, because you called her the number one fraud.
oh, I know. She's the number one fraud. Well,
Yep.
with that, we appreciate you hanging with us for this video. If you liked it, please hit like. If you know of other weird financial frauds that have happened, let us know. We would
Yeah.
love to investigate them. Um, just so you know, we really geek out in this stuff. We really enjoy it. So please give us some perspective of what you would like to hear about. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. With that, we really thank you for being with us. Have a great afternoon.